Excuse me, why is my food cold?
Cold? Be grateful you got served at all.
I paid the same price as everyone here.
Deserve? You walk in here looking like that?
Yes, I do. Now reheat my plate or get me your manager. Yo!
Oh, so now you're telling me what to do?
Brenda snatched the tray off the table and flipped it. Chicken, waffles, syrup, straight into Whitney's lap.
There. Now get out.
The diner laughed. The manager leaned on the wall, smiling. Whitney wiped her hands, picked up her phone.
I need you
One
here,
call,
right
6
now.
words. What happened next, nobody saw coming. The black SUV pulled off the interstate just past mile marker 12, where the Georgia pines thinned out and the 2-lane road bent toward a cluster of buildings that hadn't changed in 40 years. Whitney Lawson sat in the back seat, eyes half closed, temples throbbing from a 14-hour flight out of London. She'd spent the last 3 days in boardrooms that smelled like espresso and old money, signing papers that added 12 European restaurants to her portfolio. 43 locations now, 6 countries. A hospitality empire built from nothing but a grandmother's recipes and a refusal to quit. But right now, she didn't feel like an empire. She felt like a woman who hadn't eaten in 9 hours. "Pull over there," she told the driver. The diner sat at the edge of the road like something forgotten. A neon sign buzzed in the window, half the letters dead. Checkered floors visible through the glass. A tin roof stained with rust. The kind of place where the coffee was burned and the pie was perfect. Whitney stepped out alone. No entourage, no assistant. Just a plain gray hoodie, faded jeans, and white sneakers that had seen better days. No jewelry, no makeup. Her braids pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like any other tired traveler stopping for a late lunch. That was the point. She pushed through the front door. The bell above it gave a tired jingle. Inside, the air smelled like bacon grease and pine sol. Country music scratched through a speaker mounted above the register. A few locals sat scattered across vinyl booths. 2 older men arguing about bass fishing, a woman reading a newspaper, a teenager poking at a plate of fries. Whitney slid into a corner booth near the window. The vinyl cracked under her weight. She pulled out her phone. 67 unread emails. Her CFO needed approval on a lease in Chicago. Her PR director wanted a quote for a Forbes feature. Her legal team had flagged a supplier contract in Barcelona. She silenced everything, placed the phone face down on the table. All she wanted was chicken and waffles. Behind the counter, Brenda Collins leaned against the register with her hip cocked and her eyes on her phone. Mid-20s, bleached hair pulled into a high ponytail, nails too long for honest work. A wad of bubblegum shifting from one cheek to the other. She glanced up when the bell rang, saw Whitney, did that slow scan, the kind that starts at the shoes and ends at the hair, measuring everything in between against some internal checklist of who belongs and who doesn't. Whitney's sneakers were scuffed. Her hoodie had a small stain near the zipper. Her skin was dark. Brenda had already made up her mind. She leaned toward the other server, a skinny girl named Tammy with a butterfly tattoo on her wrist, and whispered something. Tammy looked over at Whitney. They both snickered. The kind of laugh that isn't meant to be hidden. The kind that's meant to be heard. Whitney heard it. She'd been hearing it her whole life. She settled into the booth, straightened the salt and pepper shakers someone had knocked crooked, and waited. Patient. Still. The way her grandmother had taught her to wait. Not because the world owed her patience, but because her own peace was worth more than anyone else's ignorance. Outside, the Georgia sun pressed against the window like a warm hand. Inside, the clock above the counter ticked past 2:15, and Brenda Collins, still smirking behind the register, had just made the most expensive mistake of her career. 20 minutes. That's how long Whitney sat in that booth before Brenda decided to walk over. Not because she was busy. She wasn't. She'd spent those 20 minutes refilling coffee for the 2 fishermen by the door, chatting with Tammy about some reality show, and scrolling through her phone with one thumb while leaning on the counter like she was holding it up. Every few minutes, she'd glance at Whitney, then look away. A little game. A little reminder of who mattered in this room and who didn't. When she finally approached, there was no menu, no greeting, no smile. Just a flat stare and 3 words. "What do you want?" Not a question, a dismissal. Whitney kept her voice even. "I'll have the chicken and waffles, a sweet tea, and a side salad, please." Brenda didn't write it down. She popped her gum. "This ain't a 5-star restaurant, honey. We got what we got." "That's fine. Whatever you have." Brenda turned and walked away without another word. She didn't even push the order through the kitchen window. She stopped at the counter, leaned toward Tammy, and said, loud enough for Whitney to hear, "Girl, she's probably gonna ask to split a $2 tea 3 ways." Tammy giggled. The cook behind the window looked out, looked at Whitney, looked back down, said nothing. Whitney watched 2 white couples walk in after her, one at 2:20, another at 2:30. Brenda greeted both at the door. Menus, smiles. "Y'all sit wherever you like." Their drinks arrived in under 5 minutes. Their food steaming hot within 15. Whitney's table stayed empty. She didn't say anything. She'd learned a long time ago that calling it out in the moment only made it worse. People like Brenda didn't hear complaints. They heard confirmation. "See? Told you she'd be difficult." At 2:40, the sweet tea arrived. Brenda set it down hard enough to send a wave over the rim. Brown liquid splashed across the table, pooling against Whitney's phone. Brenda didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just turned on her heel, and Whitney caught the grin she flashed at Tammy on the way back. Whitney picked up her phone, wiped the screen with a napkin, set it down again. She thought about leaving. For a moment, she almost did. Her hand went to her bag, her feet shifted under the table. But then something stopped her. A voice, low and warm, rising up from somewhere behind her ribs. Her grandmother, Eloise Lawson. Standing in the kitchen of their apartment in Savannah, flour on her apron, sweat on her brow, flipping chicken in a cast-iron skillet that weighed more than Whitney did at 9 years old. "Baby girl, the way people treat you says everything about them and nothing about you. You sit where you want, you eat where you want, and you never, ever let somebody else's small heart shrink yours." Whitney's feet stopped moving. She straightened her back, folded the wet napkin into a neat square, and placed it at the edge of the table. She wasn't going anywhere. At 2:50, 35 minutes after she'd ordered, the food arrived, if you could call it food. The chicken was cold, the skin soggy and pale. The waffles had gone rubbery, edges curled up like dried leaves. The salad was 3 pieces of brown lettuce and a single cherry tomato with a dent in it. Brenda set the plate down from 6 inches above the table. The silverware jumped. The sweet tea trembled. "There you go," Brenda said, not to Whitney, to the room, like she was narrating a performance. A couple at the next booth glanced over. The man smirked into his coffee. The woman looked away. The teenager with the fries pulled out his phone and started recording. Nobody told him to stop. Whitney stared at the plate. Cold chicken, soggy waffles, wilted greens. She'd built a restaurant empire on the belief that every plate told a story. About care, about pride, about respect for the person sitting across the table. This plate told a different story. It said, "You don't matter." She picked up her fork, not because she was hungry anymore, because she refused to give Brenda the satisfaction of watching her leave without eating. She cut a piece of cold chicken, raised it halfway to her mouth, and that's when Brenda came back. Brenda walked back with her arms crossed and that same crooked smile plastered on her face. She stopped right next to Whitney's booth, close enough that Whitney could smell the cheap vanilla perfume mixing with bubble gum. "How's the food?" Brenda asked. She didn't care. The question was a setup. Whitney set her fork down. "It's cold. The chicken's been sitting out for a while. Can I get it reheated, please?" Brenda tilted her head. "Reheated? You're lucky you got a plate at all. I waited 35 minutes. I just want a warm meal. And I just want customers who actually tip." Brenda looked Whitney up and down again. That same scan from before. the one that started at the sneakers and ended at the braids. But I guess we both got to deal with disappointment. Two men at the counter chuckled. The teenager kept his phone up, recording. Whitney didn't raise her voice. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." Brenda's eyebrows shot up. "The manager? Oh, this should be good." She turned toward the back. "Doug! She wants to talk to you!" Doug Pittman emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a grease-stained apron. Mid-50s, thick arms, a faded Confederate flag tattoo peeking out from under his left sleeve. He walked over slow, the walk of a man who owned every square inch of the room and wanted you to know it. "What's the problem?" Whitney pointed at her plate. "My food came cold. I asked for it to be reheated. Your waitress refused." Doug looked at the plate, looked at Brenda, looked back at Whitney. "Brenda's our best server. Been here 4 years. If she says the food's fine, the food's fine. The chicken is cold. You can feel it yourself." Doug didn't touch the plate. He crossed his arms. "Ma'am, if you don't like the service, there's the door. Nobody's keeping you." Whitney's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for what I paid for. And I'm telling you, you got it." Doug leaned in an inch closer. "Now I suggest you eat your food, pay your bill, and move along. We got real customers waiting." Real customers. The words hung in the air like smoke. Whitney stood, not to leave, to clear her tray. It was instinct, something drilled into her since childhood. You clean up after yourself. You leave a place better than you found it. Her grandmother had taught her that in the apartment in Savannah, and she'd carried it through every restaurant she'd ever built. She picked up her plate and cup, balanced them on the tray, and stepped toward the counter. Brenda moved first. "Oh, let me help you with that." She said it sweet. Too sweet. The kind of sweet that has teeth behind it. She reached for the tray. Whitney held on. For 1 second, they both had it. 2 hands, 2 intentions, 1 tray full of cold food and warm spite. Then Brenda yanked it sideways. The tray tilted. Everything slid. Chicken hit the floor with a wet slap. Waffles landed face down on the checkered tile. The salad scattered like confetti. Sweet tea exploded across Whitney's sneakers, soaked through her jeans, and pooled around her feet in a sticky brown puddle. The diner went dead quiet. Then Brenda laughed. Not a small laugh. A head-back, full-throated cackle that bounced off every wall in the room. She bent over, hands on her knees, gasping between bursts like she'd just watched the funniest thing she'd ever seen. Doug smirked. Tammy covered her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. One of the fishermen at the counter slow-clapped. Twice. 3 times. The teenager near the window kept recording. His hand was trembling, but he didn't put the phone down. Whitney stood in the middle of it. Chicken grease on her shoes, syrup running down her shin, tea dripping from the hem of her hoodie. She looked down at the mess. Then she looked up. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't curse. She bent down, picked up the plate, the one that had bounced and spun to a stop near the counter, picked up the cup, placed both on the counter neatly side by side, handles facing the same direction. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She dialed 1 number. It rang once. Someone picked up. 6 words. "I need you here, right now." She hung up, walked back to her booth, sat down, crossed her legs, placed her hands flat on the table, and waited. Brenda was still grinning when she turned to Tammy. "Bet she's calling her baby daddy to come start something." Tammy laughed. Doug shook his head and walked back toward the kitchen. "Crazy," he muttered. The diner settled. The fishermen went back to their coffee. The couple in the next booth asked for their check. The teenager lowered his phone but didn't delete the video. Nobody in that room understood what had just been set in motion. Nobody except Whitney. Whitney sat in the booth like nothing had happened. Legs crossed, hands on the table, eyes forward, still as stone. But there was something different now. Something in the way she held herself. Straighter, sharper, like a wire pulled taut. The hoodie was still stained. Her jeans were still wet. But the woman wearing them had changed. The patience was gone. What replaced it was something quieter, something colder. Purpose. Brenda noticed first. She was wiping down a table near the register when she looked over and saw Whitney still sitting there. Not eating, not scrolling, not fidgeting. Just sitting. "She's still here?" Brenda muttered to Tammy. "Maybe she's writing a Yelp review," Tammy said. They both laughed. But Brenda's laugh was shorter this time. There was something about the way Whitney sat, the absolute stillness of it, that picked at something in the back of her brain. A feeling she couldn't name. Like watching a lake go perfectly flat right before a storm. Doug passed through the dining room, saw Whitney, and frowned. "She ain't ordered nothing else?" "Nope," Brenda said. "Just sitting there like a statue." "Weird," Doug said, and went back to the kitchen. 7 minutes passed. Whitney didn't move. She was looking at her phone. Not scrolling, not texting, reading. Emails from her legal team. Property records for this zip code. A lease database her real estate division maintained for acquisitions across the Southeast. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Finding information, cataloging it, filing it away. Nobody in the diner knew what they were looking at. They saw a woman in a stained hoodie staring at her phone. They didn't see the CEO of Lawson Hospitality Group running a due diligence check in real time from a corner booth. Then the sound came. Car doors. Not one, not two. A sequence. Heavy, metallic, deliberate. The kind of sound that military SUVs make. Thunk, 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 thunk. 6 doors, 6 vehicles. 3 black Escalades pulled into the gravel parking lot, their tinted windows catching the afternoon sun like dark mirrors. The fisherman at the counter turned toward the window. The teenager sat up straight. The woman with the newspaper folded it and set it down. Even the cook came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, squinting through the glass. Brenda stopped mid-wipe. Her hand froze on the table. The rag dripped onto the floor, but she didn't notice. Through the window, 6 men stepped out, 1 from each door. All over 6 feet tall, all in tailored black suits, the kind that cost more than everything in the diner combined. White shirts, black ties, earpieces, sunglasses, shoes polished to mirrors. They moved in formation, 2 in front, 2 in the middle, 2 bringing up the rear. They crossed the parking lot in 8 seconds flat. Gravel crunched under their shoes like something being ground down. The front door opened. The bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. 6 men filled the entrance. The diner shrank. The air changed, heavier, tighter, like the room had taken a breath and couldn't let it out. They scanned the room, every face, every corner, every exit. Clinical, fast. The way people scan a room when they've been trained to look for threats and protect what matters. Then they found her. Whitney Lawson. Corner booth, stained hoodie, wet jeans, phone in hand. 2 of them took positions at the front door, arms folded, backs straight, blocking the exit without saying a word. 2 more walked to Whitney's booth and stood on either side, 1 left, 1 right, like pillars. The last 2 positioned themselves behind her, facing the room. 6 bodyguards, 1 woman. Complete silence. Brenda's gum fell out of her mouth. It landed on the freshly wiped table with a soft, wet sound that somehow echoed louder than anything else in the room. Doug stepped out of the kitchen again. His face went from confusion to something that looked like the first draft of fear. Tammy backed into the wall behind the register. The fisherman stared. The teenager raised his phone again. The couple who'd asked for their check forgot about it entirely. Whitney still hadn't looked up. She swiped 1 more page on her phone, read something, and nodded. Just barely, just once, to herself. Then she put the phone down, face up this time. And for the first time since she'd walked into this diner, Whitney Lawson looked directly at Brenda Collins. The front door opened 1 more time. The bell didn't ring. Someone caught it with their hand before it could. A woman walked in. Not tall, but the kind of presence that made the room adjust. Navy blue suit, perfectly tailored. Black heels that clicked against the tile with the rhythm of a metronome. Dark hair pinned back. A Bluetooth earpiece in her left ear. An iPad tucked under her right arm. Clarissa Donovan, executive assistant to Whitney Lawson. 3 degrees, 7 languages. The kind of person who could end your career with a single email and make it look like a scheduling conflict. She walked past the bodyguards without acknowledging them. Past the fishermen who pulled their elbows off the counter as she passed. Past Brenda, who had backed herself against the milkshake machine and hadn't blinked in 30 seconds. Clarissa stopped at Whitney's booth. She didn't sit. She stood at attention, iPad already open. Ms. Lawson, your legal team is on standby. The acquisition documents are ready for your signature. 3 words cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Ms. Lawson. The fisherman nearest the counter set his coffee down so slowly it didn't make a sound. The woman with the newspaper brought her hand to her mouth. The teenager's phone dipped for a second, his arm suddenly weak, then came back up. Brenda's lips moved, but no sound came out. She looked at Tammy. Tammy looked at the floor. Doug gripped the edge of the counter hard enough to turn his knuckles white. His Confederate tattoo stretched tight under the pressure. Clarissa turned the iPad toward Whitney. On the screen, the Lawson Hospitality Group corporate page. A Forbes profile with a photo of Whitney in a black suit, arms crossed, standing in front of a Manhattan restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows. Below it, a portfolio overview. 43 restaurants, 6 countries, 3 Michelin stars spread across 4 locations. Annual revenue, north of $200 million. The same woman, same face, same braids. But in that photo, she stood in a room where people paid $300 a plate to eat food crafted under her name. Whitney looked at the screen the way a mechanic looks at a dashboard. Familiar, routine, nothing to prove. She took the stylus Clarissa offered and signed 2 documents without hesitation. Quick, clean strokes. The signature of someone who signs 100 things a day. The property acquisition? Whitney asked. Completed 12 minutes ago, Clarissa said. The owner accepted the offer at asking price. Title transfer is in process. Whitney nodded. Pull up the building records for this address. Clarissa tapped twice. A new screen appeared. Lease records, property tax filings, and a highlighted line. Current tenant. Roadside Grill, operated by Doug Pittman. Lease renewal date in 90 days. Doug saw his name on the screen. He went pale. The kind of pale that starts at the ears and works its way inward until the whole face looks like it's been drained. You, he started. Whitney raised one finger, just one. Doug stopped talking. A man who hadn't listened to a word she said all afternoon suddenly couldn't open his mouth. She stood up, slowly, syrup still staining her jeans, tea still darkening her sneakers, the hoodie still wrinkled and damp. But the way she stood, shoulders back, chin level, eyes clear, made every piece of expensive fabric in the room feel cheap. The bodyguards adjusted, a subtle shift, 2 steps closer. The formation tightened around her like a wall made of men. Whitney looked at Brenda first, held her gaze for 3 full seconds without blinking. Brenda's hands were shaking. The rag she'd been holding earlier lay on the floor where she'd dropped it. Her lower lip trembled, not from sadness, from the sudden crushing weight of understanding exactly what she'd done and exactly who she'd done it to. Then Whitney spoke. Not loudly. She didn't need to. I own 43 restaurants, 11 of them within 50 miles of this booth. I know what good service looks like. She paused. I also know what discrimination looks like. Brenda opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Whitney turned to Clarissa. The complaints. Clarissa swiped again. A new screen. A list. Dates, names, descriptions. 14 entries spanning 3 years. 14 formal complaints, Whitney said, turning the iPad so the room could see. Filed against this establishment for racial discrimination. All 14 dismissed by the manager on duty. She looked at Doug. That would be you. Doug's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled out of water. Whitney read the first one aloud. March 2021. A black family of 4, 2 parents, 2 children under 10, were told there were no available tables. The restaurant was half empty. She looked up. The hostess that night seated a white couple 5 minutes later. She read another. September 2022. A Latino couple was charged an 18% service fee that didn't appear on any other receipt that evening. When they questioned it, they were told it was standard policy. It wasn't. And another. January 2023. A black teenager was accused of stealing a salt shaker. The server grabbed his backpack and emptied it on the floor in front of the entire dining room. Nothing was stolen. He was reaching for his wallet. Each one landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread across the room. The fishermen stared at their coffee. The couple at the next booth looked at each other with something that might have been shame. The teenager's phone was still recording, but his free hand had moved to cover his mouth. Doug found his voice. Barely. Now look, some of those were misunderstandings. 14 misunderstandings? Whitney's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. In 3 years? All involving customers of color? That's not a misunderstanding, Doug. That's a pattern. And patterns have consequences. She set the iPad on the table, face up, the list still glowing. 14 families, she said. 14 moments just like this one. And every single time, someone in charge looked the other way. She turned back to Doug. As of 12 minutes ago, my company owns this building. Your lease comes up for review in 90 days. What happens in those 90 days depends entirely on what happens in the next 5 minutes. Doug tried to speak. His voice came out cracked, dry, stripped of every ounce of authority he'd walked in with. Now hold on. You can't just... This is my place. It was your place, Whitney said. Now it's my building. And in my buildings, people eat in peace. She let that settle. 3 seconds. 5. The clock above the register ticked like a heartbeat. Then Whitney addressed the room. Not shouting, not performing, just speaking. The way someone speaks when they've earned the right to be heard. Every person who walks through a door deserves basic respect. The color of their skin, the clothes they wear, the car they drove here in. None of that tells you who they are. None of it tells you what they've built. None of it tells you what they're capable of. She looked at Brenda one last time. You judged me by my hoodie, by my sneakers, by the color of my skin. You decided I was nothing before I said a single word. Whitney picked up the napkin she'd folded earlier, the one she'd used to wipe tea off her phone, the one she'd squared neatly at the edge of the table back when she still thought this was a place that deserved her patience. She set it in the center of the table. I hope the next time someone walks through that door looking like me, you think twice. She turned. The bodyguards parted. Clarissa fell into step behind her, iPad closed, heels clicking. Whitney Lawson walked toward the door. Behind her, the diner sat in a silence so heavy it had a pulse. Whitney hadn't reached the door yet when Brenda broke. It started in her knees, a buckle, small, almost invisible, like someone had cut an invisible wire holding her upright. She grabbed the edge of the counter, her nails scraped against the formica. Wait! The word came out raw, shredded, like it had been dragged through broken glass on the way up. Whitney stopped. She didn't turn around. The bodyguard stopped with her, a synchronized pause that made the floorboards creak under their combined weight. Please, Brenda said. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't know what? Whitney's voice came from over her shoulder, calm, flat, not cruel but not warm either. The voice of someone who'd heard this exact sentence 1,000 times and stopped believing it 999 apologies ago. I didn't know who you were. Whitney turned then, slowly. The bodyguards parted just enough for Brenda to see her face. That's the problem, Brenda. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry because you found out it mattered. The words hung in the air. Brenda's mascara was running. 2 dark lines cutting through her foundation like cracks in a mask. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers twisted together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Doug stepped forward. He'd found something that looked like composure, but up close it was held together with spit and panic. Ms. Lawson, look. She's young. She made a mistake. We can work this out. I'll talk to her. 14 complaints, Doug. Whitney's gaze shifted to him like a searchlight finding its target. 3 years, 14 families who walked in here expecting a meal and walked out feeling less than human. That's not a mistake, that's a culture. And cultures start at the top. Doug's mouth worked, but nothing useful came out. He looked like a man watching his house burn from the inside, room by room, with the front door locked. Clarissa stepped forward and handed Whitney a folder. Cream-colored, tabbed, organized with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment since the phone call. Inside, printed copies of all 14 discrimination complaints, each one with a date, a name, and a detailed account of what happened. Whitney opened the folder. She didn't read them all. She didn't need to. She picked 3. Angela and Terrence Thompson, she read. August 2021. Party of 4. 2 adults, 2 children, ages 6 and 8. Arrived at 6:30 on a Friday evening. Told by the hostess that there were no available tables and the wait would be at least 90 minutes. The restaurant was at 40% capacity. A white party of 3 was seated immediately after they left. She turned the page. Sophia and Javier Reyes. November 2022. Dinner for 2. Charged an 18% service fee on a $40 bill. No other table that evening received the same charge. When they asked, they were told it was a new policy. The policy didn't exist. Another page. Darnell Washington, age 15. January 2023. Eating alone after basketball practice. Accused by a server of stealing a salt shaker. The server... Whitney looked up at Brenda. Brenda looked at the floor. Emptied his backpack onto the floor in front of 12 other customers. Books, notebooks, a birthday card from his mother. Nothing was stolen. He never came back. The teenager near the window lowered his phone. His eyes were red. He looked about 15 himself, about the same age as Darnell Washington. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and picked the phone back up. Kept recording. But something in the way he held it had changed. Not curiosity anymore. Witness. The fishermen at the counter had both turned around on their stools, facing the room now instead of their coffee. One of them, the older one, the one who'd slow-clapped, had his head down, his cap pulled low, his hands wrapped around his mug like he was holding on to something that couldn't hold him back. The woman with the newspaper had set it down 5 minutes ago. She hadn't picked it up since. Her coffee sat untouched, getting cold, just like Whitney's chicken had. Doug tried one more time. Some of those... You gotta understand, things get heated in a restaurant, people exaggerate. Doug! Whitney closed the folder. I've built 43 restaurants. I've served millions of meals across 6 countries. I've managed thousands of employees. I know exactly what gets heated in a restaurant and what doesn't. This, she held up the folder, isn't heat. It's neglect. It's a man who looked the other way because looking the other way was easier than doing his job. Doug had nothing left. He leaned against the counter and stared at a crack in the tile floor like it held the answer to everything that had gone wrong in his life. Brenda spoke again, quieter now. The performance was gone. The defiance was gone. What was left was a woman in a stained apron with mascara on her cheeks and something heavy sitting on her chest. I need this job, she said. I got a kid. A little girl, she's 4. I can't... She stopped, swallowed, tried again. I can't lose this. Whitney paused. The room noticed. The bodyguards noticed. Even Clarissa, who never reacted to anything, glanced sideways at Whitney for half a second. Because something shifted. Not in Whitney's posture, that stayed the same. But in her eyes. A flicker. Brief. The kind of thing you'd miss if you blinked. Whitney had a daughter, too. Naomi, 7 years old. Brown skin, big eyes, a laugh that could fill a room like sunlight filling a jar. She was home right now, probably sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, building something out of Lego bricks with the nanny, waiting for her mother to come back from London with the chocolate she'd promised. Whitney had spent her entire career building a world where Naomi could walk into any restaurant on Earth and be treated like she belonged. Not because of her mother's name, not because of Bodyguards or Forbes profiles or buildings with her company's name on the lease. Because that's what every child deserved, including Brenda's 4-year-old daughter, who would someday grow up and learn, one way or another, what her mother had taught the world about who matters and who doesn't. She looked at Brenda, saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw, underneath all of it, a woman who had probably never been taught to see the ugliness in what she'd been raised to believe. That didn't make it okay, but it made it human. "Then you need to be the kind of person your daughter can be proud of," Whitney said. "Because right now, Brenda, if your little girl had been sitting in this diner today watching you dump food on a stranger's lap because of the color of her skin," Whitney let the sentence hang. "What would you want her to learn from that?" Brenda's face crumbled. Not the dramatic kind, the real kind. The kind where every muscle gives up at once and what's underneath is raw and unprotected and terrified. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Whitney looked at Doug, then at the room, then back at Brenda. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," she said. "I'm here to make sure this never happens again. Not in this building, not under my name." She set the folder on the table next to the iPad, both screens still glowing.
"And here's how that's going to work."
Whitney laid it out like a blueprint. No emotion, no negotiation, just terms. First, every employee in this building, servers, cooks, management, completes a mandatory anti-discrimination training program. 60 days, certified, no exceptions. She looked at Doug. "Including you." Doug nodded. He didn't have the energy to argue anymore. The fight had left him somewhere between the 14th complaint and the word lease. "Second, this diner will implement a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Any staff member who violates it, first offense, immediate termination. No warnings, no second chances." Brenda flinched. Whitney saw it. She continued. "Third, a community advisory board. 5 members, diverse, selected from this town, will meet monthly to review operations, complaints, and hiring practices. They report directly to my company, not to management." She paused, let the weight of it settle. The clock on the wall ticked 3 times before she spoke again. "Fourth, 10% of this diner's monthly revenue will fund a scholarship for local students. Specifically, students from families who filed complaints against this establishment and were ignored." Whitney held up the folder one more time. "These families, their children." Doug's eyes went glassy. Not with tears, with the slow recognition of a man realizing that the world he'd built around himself wasn't a castle. It was a box, and someone had just opened the lid. Then Whitney turned to Brenda. "You have a choice." Brenda looked up. Mascara dried in streaks on her cheeks. Her hands had stopped shaking, but she was holding them against her stomach like she was trying to keep something inside from falling out. "Complete the 60-day training program, all of it. Show up, do the work, pass the evaluation." Whitney held her gaze. "And you keep your job." Brenda's breath hitched. "Or leave. Today, right now. No one will stop you." The diner was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in someone's glass 3 booths away. Brenda's voice was barely a whisper. "I'll do the training." Whitney nodded. Once, sharp, like a contract had been signed. She turned to Clarissa. "Get the paperwork started. I want the training program in place within 2 weeks. Community board selection within 30 days. Scholarship fund active by quarter's end." Clarissa was already typing. "Done, and calendared." Whitney looked at the room one last time. The fisherman, the teenager, the couple, the cook who'd been standing in the kitchen doorway for the last 10 minutes without saying a word. "This diner stays open," she said, "but it changes. Starting today." She walked out. 6 bodyguards fell into formation around her. Clarissa followed, heels clicking against the gravel outside. The Escalade doors opened, closed, engines hummed, and then they were gone. The diner sat in silence for a full minute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The neon sign buzzed in the window. The country music had stopped at some point. Nobody had noticed when. Then the teenager stood up. He stopped the recording on his phone, looked at it for a long moment, and uploaded it. 3 months later, the roadside grill reopened. The tin roof was still there, but it had been repainted. The neon sign worked, every letter. The checkered floors had been polished. New tables, same layout. The place felt the same, but different. like a house that had been cleaned by someone who actually cared.
The staff looked different too.
Not entirely new, some of the old faces remained. But alongside them were new ones. A black line cook named Ellis, who'd trained at a culinary school in Atlanta. A Latina hostess named Valentina, who greeted every customer at the door with a menu and a name. A new manager, Sonia Wells, 29, born and raised in this town, who'd earned a hospitality degree while working nights at a gas station. Sonia stood where Doug used to stand. But she didn't lean against the counter. She moved through the room, checking tables, talking to customers, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting because that's what care looks like when it has a heartbeat. Doug was gone. He'd resigned 2 weeks after Whitney's visit. No statement, no farewell. He just stopped showing up. Someone said he moved to Florida. Nobody asked for details. Brenda was still there. She looked different. Not physically. Same bleached ponytail, same nails, though shorter now. But something behind the eyes had shifted, like a window that had been painted shut for years, and someone had finally cracked it open. She'd completed the 60-day program, every session, every evaluation. Her trainer later told Clarissa that Brenda had been the most resistant participant in the first week and the most engaged by the fourth. She'd cried during a module on implicit bias, not performatively, but quietly, in the back row, with a tissue pressed to her face and her phone turned off. She was a shift supervisor now. The staff respected her. Not because she was loud, she'd gotten quieter, actually. They respected her because she'd changed in front of them, in real time, and that kind of change is harder to fake than confidence. On a Tuesday in October, a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot. Whitney Lawson walked through the front door. Same hoodie, same sneakers, same braids. The bell jingled above her. Brenda was behind the counter. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Brenda picked up a menu, walked over and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Lawson. Your booth is ready. Can I start you with a sweet tea?" Whitney smiled, the first real smile she'd had in this building. Sweet tea sounds perfect.
The chicken came hot.
The waffles were golden. The salad was fresh. Crisp lettuce, red tomatoes, no dents. Brenda served it herself, set the plate down gently, and placed the silverware parallel to the edge. The way you do when you care. Whitney took a bite, closed her eyes, chewed slowly. It tasted like her grandmother's kitchen. When she finished, Brenda came to clear the table. She paused, looked at Whitney with eyes that were steady now, not shaking, not performing, not hiding. "Thank you," Brenda said, "for not giving up on me." Whitney set her napkin down, folded it into a neat square, the same way she'd folded the one 3 months ago, the one soaked with tea and humiliation. "Thank my grandmother," Whitney said. "She never gave up on anyone." The teenager's video hit the internet that same afternoon. By midnight, it had 100,000 views. By the end of the week, 30 million. The comments section became a battlefield, then a conversation, then something that looked, from a distance, like progress. News outlets picked it up. Local stations first, then cable, then national. The headline wrote itself. Black woman humiliated at Georgia diner turns out to be multi-millionaire restaurant CEO. But that wasn't the story people kept sharing. The story they shared was what happened after. Whitney appeared on a morning show 2 weeks later. The host leaned in, expecting anger, expecting fire. What she got was a woman in a navy blazer speaking quietly about systems and second chances. "I didn't go back to that diner to punish anyone," Whitney said. "I went back because 14 families deserve to know that someone finally listened." She didn't name Brenda on television. She didn't name Doug. She talked about patterns, how they form, how they hide, how they break. She talked about the difference between a mistake and a culture. She talked about her grandmother, who'd cooked for white families in Savannah for 30 years and never once received the same courtesy she gave. 3 major restaurant chains reached out within a month. They wanted Whitney's training program, the one she'd built from the ground up for the roadside grill. She licensed it, called it the Eloise Standard after her grandmother. Within 6 months, it was running in over 200 locations across 12 states. The Lawson Foundation launched a national campaign. Every table deserves respect. Billboards, social media, a short documentary that played in culinary schools from New York to Los Angeles. The campaign didn't preach. It showed. Real footage, real stories, real faces of people who'd been turned away, overcharged, or humiliated at places they'd just wanted to eat. Brenda appeared in a follow-up piece for a local news station. She sat in the diner, her diner, the one she now helped run, and spoke without notes. "I was raised with certain ideas about people," she said. "I didn't think they were wrong because nobody ever told me they were. That doesn't make it okay, but it means I had to choose. Keep believing what I was handed or pick it up and look at it." She paused. "I looked at it, and I didn't like what I saw." The interviewer asked if she'd ever spoken to Whitney again after that October visit. Brenda smiled. Small, real. "She comes in once a month, orders the same thing every time, chicken and waffles, sweet tea, side salad." She looked down at her hands. "I make sure it's hot." Back in Atlanta, Whitney's daughter Naomi saw a clip of her mother on the news. She was sitting on the living room floor, Lego bricks scattered around her when the segment played. "Mama," she said that evening, climbing into Whitney's lap, "why were they mean to you?" Whitney smoothed Naomi's hair, pulled her close, felt the weight of her, warm, solid, perfect. "Because they didn't know me, baby, but now they do." Naomi thought about that for a second. The way 7-year-olds think, fast and serious and then suddenly done. "Can we get waffles tomorrow?" Whitney laughed, the kind of laugh that fills a room, the kind her grandmother would have recognized. "Yeah, baby, we can get waffles." On a Sunday morning in November, Whitney drove to Savannah, alone. No SUV, no bodyguards, just her, a rental car, and a bouquet of white lilies. She parked outside the cemetery where Eloise Lawson had been buried 11 years ago, walked the path she'd memorized as a teenager, knelt beside the headstone, simple gray granite, clean edges, a carved line that read, "She fed everyone." Whitney placed the flowers, pressed her palm flat against the stone, felt the warmth of the Georgia sun soaking through the granite. "I kept my promise, Grandma," she whispered. "Every table. Every time." She stayed for a while. The wind moved through the oak trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Then she stood, brushed the grass from her knees, and walked back to the car. She had restaurants to run, people to feed, tables to set. And not a single one of them would ever turn anyone away.
14 complaints, 3 years, and not once did anyone in charge listen until Whitney Lawson sat down in that booth. Whitney didn't buy that building because she was angry. She bought it because she made a promise to a grandmother who cooked for strangers her whole life and never once was treated the way she treated them. Eloise Lawson taught her granddaughter something most people never learn: that your dignity isn't something other people hand you. It's something you carry into every room, even rooms that don't want you there. And the real power in this story is not the escalades, it's not the Forbes profile, it's a woman sitting in a puddle of sweet tea, folding a napkin into a perfect square, and refusing to let someone else's cruelty rewrite who she is. But here's what stays with me. If respect only shows up after the bodyguards walk in, was it ever really respect? And if Brenda's 4-year-old daughter had been watching from the booth, at what age does a child learn who deserves dignity and who doesn't? Drop the answer below. I want to hear it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Some tables were never meant to be turned away from.